In a land of olive trees and ancient gods, a curious baby boy was born. This was in 384 BCE in a town by the Blue Sea called Stagira. He was named Aristotle. Even from the start, Aristotle's eyes were bright with wonder. His father, Nicomachus, was the king's doctor, a gentleman who cared for people. Aristotle grew up watching his father examine plants and heal the sick. Sometimes Aristotle even went with his father to the royal palace, where he saw exotic herbs and mysterious potions. In those bright halls he felt that knowledge had a kind of magic. His mother, Phaestus, taught him kindness and helped him learn to speak. As a boy, he wandered among olive trees, asking why of everything. The stars, the waves, and the songs of crickets became his first teachers of mystery. Some legends said his family descended from Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. Maybe that's why young Aristotle was born with a deep curiosity about living creatures. Little did anyone know that this curious child would one day teach a prince who would conquer much of the known world and help shape the whole of human knowledge. He was born about a decade after Socrates died, in a Greece where questions were as common as the olive trees. Everywhere young Aristotle looked, people were talking of virtue and the nature of the gods. This was an era of thinkers, and the air buzzed with inquiry. When he was about 17, Aristotle left his quiet town for Athens, the great city of wisdom and learning. He traveled south through rolling mountains and along the shining sea, seeing sights a young man had never seen before. At last he arrived in Athens around 367 BC, entering a city brimming with thinkers. He felt both excitement and a kind of awe as he stepped through those gates for the first time. In Athens, Aristotle joined Plato's academy, a grove of olive trees and marble halls full of scholars. Plato, the academy's head, was a wise teacher who welcomed questions about courage, justice, and knowledge. Aristotle studied alongside other curious minds. He listened and spoke in discussions under sunny skies, and proved himself so sharp that Plato nicknamed him the mind of the school. The classroom was alive. When Aristotle answered a hard question, Plato and the others would turn to listen. Aristotle often smiled at a good idea, his eyes shining with delight. Aristotle remained at the academy for about 20 years, learning and growing. He admired Plato greatly, but as time passed, he began to have his own ideas. Sometimes Aristotle would wonder, maybe things work a little differently than that, politely questioning Plato's teachings. Their debates were friendly, filled with mutual respect. Sometimes they disagreed, but always over a shared love of truth. The academy had become his new home. Around 347 BC, Plato grew very old and passed away. Aristotle felt it was then time for a new adventure. Athens had been his home of learning, but Aristotle yearned to explore the world beyond the city. With a respectful bow to his teacher's memory, he quietly left the academy. He carried Plato's wisdom in his heart, but he was ready to find answers on his own path. Leaving Athens was hard. He looked back one evening at the city's lights, knowing he was carrying its knowledge with him as he walked away.
If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support truly helps me keep creating more peaceful stories like this one. And now let's continue with the story.
Aristotle traveled to the coast of Asia Minor in present-day Turkey and to an island called Lesbos to continue his studies. The journey took him to new lands full of color and light. There he stayed with Hermias, a local ruler who became a friend. Aristotle's loyal student Theophrastus joined him on this journey. Together they looked at the world with fresh eyes. He breathed new air on those shores, seeing unfamiliar plants and animals. The land around Lesbos was sunlit and wild, with the sea shining blue. Every step held discovery. Aristotle married Hermias's adopted daughter, Pythias, and they had a little daughter together. These years in Asia Minor were full of learning and discovery. Aristotle and Theophrastus roamed the fields and shores of Lesbos, studying plants, animals, and all the secrets of the living world. He examined flowers, watched birds swooping and diving, and even studied fish swimming in clear streams. He made careful notes of everything he observed. Nature became his teacher. Aristotle believed every creature and plant had a purpose in the grand scheme of life. He once remarked, "Nature does nothing in vain," meaning that everything in nature is there for a reason. He watched ants and bees at work. To him, every creature was connected in a grand tapestry of life. He looked at each creature closely, the veins of a leaf, the petals of a flower, the way a fish's gills moved in the water, and saw wonder in each detail. Nothing was too small to teach him something. Then, in 343 BC, news came from his homeland. King Philip II of Macedon asked Aristotle to tutor his young son, Prince Alexander, a boy of about 13. Aristotle gladly agreed and returned to Pella, the Macedonian capital. For several years, Aristotle became the teacher of Prince Alexander, who would later be known as Alexander the Great. Imagine Aristotle taking walks with the eager boy through royal gardens. In those walks through the palace gardens of Mieza, young Alexander at his side, both were full of eagerness and wonder. Aristotle taught Alexander about nature and poetry, about stars and logic, and about how to be a good and fair leader. He even gave Alexander his own copy of Homer's Iliad, the great story of heroes, with notes in the margins. He told stories of Achilles and Odysseus, and explained that the courage of heroes was something Alexander himself could aspire to. He hoped these lessons would guide Alexander to be wise and just. Aristotle often asked Alexander questions, too, encouraging the boy to think deeply. In these lessons, Aristotle shared not only knowledge, but also a love of learning. After Alexander went off to conquer the world, Aristotle returned to Athens. It was about 335 BC. He was no longer a student. Now he was ready to teach. The familiar Acropolis watched over him as he came back. He founded a school called the Lyceum, set in a grove of trees just outside the city. It had tall marble columns and wide paths to walk. At the Lyceum, Aristotle and his students did something special. Each morning they gathered and walked together under the colonnade, discussing ideas as they strolled. Because of this habit, they became known as the peripatetics, which means those who walk around. Aristotle believed that walking and talking helped ideas flow freely. His school covered every subject he loved: science, philosophy, politics, and art. The Lyceum itself was as much a garden as a school. The air was scented with herbs and olive trees, and students sat on marble benches or on the grass under the shade. Aristotle often drew diagrams in the dirt with a stick, or wrote on wax tablets as the wind rustled the leaves above. In this way, nature and knowledge were woven together in every lesson. He loved to teach outside, where ideas were carried along with the breeze. Sometimes the students would laugh at a clever answer, or watch the sunlight dance through the leaves as Aristotle explained a difficult idea. The environment seemed to encourage curiosity. A chirping bird or a rolling cloud could become part of a lesson. Aristotle wrote his ideas down so others could read them later. He didn't publish books in the modern sense. Instead, his students' notes became his works. Altogether, he wrote around 200 treatises. Only about 30 of these have survived, but they span many fields of knowledge. He organized knowledge like a careful gardener organizes his plants. Every subject had its place. Surviving titles include physics, about nature, Nicomachean ethics, about how to live a good life, politics, about city governments, and poetics, about poetry and drama. In these works you can find Aristotle's thoughts on everything he studied. He even wrote about the soul and how the heart and mind work together, on music and on architecture, on logic and on memory. His writings, though sometimes written as lecture notes, carried Aristotle's ideas to all who would read them. Aristotle was endlessly curious about the natural world. He once said, "All people by nature desire to know." He saw this truth in every child who gaped at the sky or puzzled over a seashell. So he devoted himself to learning everything he could observe. Nature was his teacher, and Aristotle used all his senses to explore it. Every new sunrise found him outside with his notebooks. He spent long days studying animals and plants. He noticed that some animals have blood and others don't. He wrote detailed descriptions of each creature he saw, its parts, its behavior, where it lived. He looked at flowers, birds, and fish, writing down everything he saw. Aristotle believed every living thing had a purpose in the grand scheme of life. He once said, "Nature does nothing in vain," meaning nothing in nature is there without a reason. He watched ants and bees at work. To him, every creature was connected in a grand tapestry of life. When he saw an ant carrying a leaf or a bee collecting pollen, he felt even the smallest creature was part of nature's story. Aristotle's wonder went beyond earth to the heavens. He studied the sky and believed the earth itself was round. For example, he noticed that during a lunar eclipse, the shadow of the earth on the moon is round. When travelers sailed south from Greece, different stars appeared in the sky, another hint of a curved world. These clues convinced him the earth must be spherical. Even without modern instruments, Aristotle used careful observation to understand our world. He drew maps and charts, trying to connect the stars and planets in harmony. He looked at the night sky and thought deeply, what keeps the moon near? What makes the seasons change? Each question made him more determined to find answers. Aristotle also loved to make sense of complicated ideas by organizing them. He developed the first formal system of logic, giving rules for clear thinking. For example, he taught with a simple pattern. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. In this way, he showed how new truths can be deduced from known facts. It was as if he lined up ideas like stepping stones. If the first is true, and it leads to the next, then the end will be true too. This method of reasoning became a powerful tool. By following Aristotle's logic, scholars could check each step of an argument like a chain reaction. If one link was false, the chain would break. But if all links held, the conclusion was sound. For nearly 2,000 years, people studied Aristotle's logic as the perfect example of how to think carefully and avoid error. Even today, students learn syllogisms just as Aristotle taught. Aristotle also thought deeply about how people live together. He said, man is by nature a social animal. He noticed that from birth, humans find themselves in families, villages, and cities. It seemed natural to him that people connect and help one another. He believed that a community is like an extended family. Humans need community to be happy. He would stroll through the agora, marketplace of Athens, and see citizens talking and trading, and he would nod, yes, this is how people thrive. He wrote a book called Politics, where he explored different ways governments work. Aristotle believed the best governments were those that ruled for the common good of their people. He argued that a good city has laws that encourage education, virtue, and freedom. In other words, Aristotle saw strong communities as those that helped citizens be wise, kind, and free. He compared a city to a body with different parts working together, or to a flock of birds moving as one. Every person had a role, just as every feather helps a bird fly. Friendship was one of Aristotle's favorite topics. He taught that having good friends is a great gift. He said, friendship is one soul dwelling in two bodies. By this, he meant that true friends are very close. They share each other's joys and sorrows as if they were one. Imagine two friends so linked that when one laughs, the other smiles. Aristotle believed that kind of friendship helps both people become better. He explained there are three kinds of friendship. First are friendships of pleasure, like friends you enjoy having fun with. Second are friendships of usefulness, like work partners who help each other achieve goals. The highest kind is friendship based on virtue, where both friends admire each other's good character. He believed this last kind can last a lifetime because it is built on mutual respect and honesty. In the Lyceum gardens, Aristotle would tell this to his students. Friends of virtue are like trees that grow strong over the years, providing shade and fruit for each other. Education was another subject Aristotle valued greatly. He cared about how children grow and learn. He often said, "Give me a child until he is 7, and I will show you the man." By this he meant that the character and habits formed when we are very young often stay with us forever. It's a reminder that teaching good things early in life can shape a person for their whole life. Aristotle himself was a teacher to many students, from children to young adults. At the Lyceum, he didn't just lecture. He also asked questions and engaged his students in discussions, songs, and even gentle exercises. He believed in educating the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. In those gardens under the trees, students learned not just facts, but how to think, how to speak, and how to be good people. Aristotle knew that learning by doing and playing was as important as learning from books. He often used games and stories to teach lessons about virtue and wisdom. Aristotle often reminded others to look inward. He said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." In other words, understanding our own mind and heart is the first step to learning anything else. He believed that before you can understand the world, you must understand yourself. It was, he thought, the start of true wisdom. In the same way that he studied nature carefully, Aristotle urged students to examine their own thoughts and feelings. A wise person, he said, asks, "Why do I act this way? Why do I feel this emotion?" By asking such questions about themselves, people learn to grow. This idea, looking inward to guide oneself outward, became a guiding light for thinkers long after Aristotle. Many years later, students in faraway lands would whisper his words as they held books, reminding themselves to reflect on their own hearts.
Aristotle also spoke a lot about virtue and balance. He said that good qualities are found in the middle, not at the extremes. For example, he taught that courage lies between being too fearful and being too reckless. Generosity lies between being too stingy and being too wasteful. He called this the golden mean. In his view, a happy, virtuous life comes from finding the right balance in all our actions. He emphasized that practicing the golden mean in everyday life is how we become good. A person should train to do the right thing in the right amount. If you repeat honest, kind actions, those qualities become part of you. In this way, Aristotle taught that virtues like honesty, patience, and bravery turn into habits by practice, leading to a stable and happy life. He compared virtues to muscles. If you exercise them by doing the right thing over and over, they grow strong. Aristotle taught that true happiness comes from living a virtuous life. He even wrote, "Happiness depends upon ourselves." By this he meant that our happiness comes from our own choices and actions, not from riches or luck. If we practice honesty, courage, and kindness and balance, we become happy on the inside. In his philosophy, building good character was the surest path to joy. Aristotle reminded people that knowing what is right is only part of the journey. Actually doing it matters too. He said that virtues become habits by repeating them, like practicing an instrument makes music come naturally. If you are honest and kind again and again, those qualities become part of you. In this way, doing good deeds turns someone into a good person. He would say that simply hearing the right words isn't enough. We have to live them. Even at the quiet end of a day, Aristotle found meaning in hope. He said hope is a waking dream. He meant that the dreams we hold while we are awake can guide us. Hope, Aristotle believed, is like a gentle light shining in the darkness of doubt. It gives us strength to keep going even when times are hard. He taught that each new morning is a chance to chase dreams. When we wake up with hopes and plans, Aristotle would say, we are carrying our dreams forward. His words remind us to never stop imagining something better ahead. In this way, hope becomes a tool of wisdom. By hoping and planning, we make dreams part of our journey. Like a ship guided by the stars, our life can be guided by our dreams. Aristotle also enjoyed stories and art, believing they could teach us deep truths. He said the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. In other words, a good play or picture should show us what truly lies beneath the surface, not just a pretty image. He studied Greek tragedies and poetry, saying that when we watch heroes face great challenges, we feel pity and fear in our hearts. Through these feelings we understand ourselves better. For Aristotle, art should move the soul and help us learn, just like asking why does in science. He found wisdom even in stories and music. He often discussed plays by Sophocles and poems by Homer, explaining how they showed values like honor and courage. As Aristotle grew old, the world around him changed. In 323 BC, his former student Alexander died far away, and some people in Athens began to resent Macedonians. Aristotle did not want to risk being punished as Socrates had been, so in 322 BC he quietly left Athens. He traveled to the island of Euboea, to a town called Chalcis, near his mother's homeland, to live out his days in peace. On Euboea, away from the politics of the city, Aristotle lived simply. Later that year he died of natural causes at about 62 years old. He had once said he wanted to be buried beside his wife, and it is said he was laid to rest next to Pythias, the woman he loved. Before he went, he told his loyal friends to keep his work safe, and asked his friend Theophrastus to take over the school. Theophrastus promised to preserve Aristotle's legacy and the knowledge of the Lyceum. Even after Aristotle died, his ideas lived on. His students and followers made many copies of his writings. Over the centuries, scholars in places as distant as Alexandria, Baghdad, and Paris studied Aristotle's works. For many generations, people simply called him the philosopher. His writings became the foundation of knowledge for a very long time. Aristotle's influence shaped whole civilizations. In the Middle Ages, both Christian monks and Muslim scholars studied Aristotle's works as guides to science and philosophy. Even great thinkers like Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s built their ideas on Aristotle's writings. Through libraries and universities, new discoveries were measured against the framework Aristotle built. In this way, the quiet boy from Stagira helped guide human understanding for thousands of years. Now, many centuries later, if you sit quietly under a starlit sky, you might feel Aristotle's presence in your own thoughts. He once said, "All humans by nature desire to know," and in the silence of evening, your own curiosity whispers back at him. When you wonder about the stars or a story you read, you are following in his footsteps of wonder. As you drift toward sleep or gaze at the morning light, remember Aristotle's gentle voice asking, "Why and how?" He believed these questions are like gifts, each a small adventure. When you pose a question or dream of a new idea, it is as if the spirit of Aristotle is guiding you to wisdom. So stay curious and let the world be your classroom, with the wonder of Aristotle lighting your way. If this story brought you comfort or inspired a reflection, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to share a thought or ask a question, feel free to leave a comment. I read and reply to everyone. Thank you for being here.